I'm batting 1,000 already this morning because last time I came to Houston to give a talk, my spouse called me and said, "Oh, are you planning on wearing your suit to give your talk?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." She said, "Well, the pants are in the garage," when I had already arrived in Houston at that time. So I've got my whole suit today. So with all of those accolades, I am the typical absent-minded professor. So I'm happy to be here as a fully dressed for you. So thank you again so much for having me. I'm hoping we're going to have some fun today. I am going to be talking about flipped classrooms. And to get us started, if you haven't had a chance to go ahead and sign up, that's okay. But if you'd like to participate using this system, what I'd like you to do is have your neighbor take a picture of the screen so that you have the instructions and you can go ahead and get that moving as we go on throughout the session today. So if you want to participate using the online system, but you haven't had a chance to get in just now, have someone at your table take a picture of the screen for you so that you can follow those instructions as we go throughout. Okay? In addition, some folks from the design team, they can raise their hands. They can come around and help you get in to the system if you need additional help. So we're going to be talking about flipped classrooms, Flipped Classroom 101, an introduction to flipped classrooms. Go ahead and raise your hand and someone will come around and help you. So would one of you mind coming?
The slide is erased. I cannot do anything.
It's okay. We'll get someone to come and help you. Don't worry. So what I'd like you to do, first of all, you had some practice. You had some practice with drawing if you went onto that first screen. Now, everybody has some paper on their table. And what I'd like you to do is take one piece of paper and take a pen. If you don't have a pen, raise your hand. Sure.
She's erasing.
Okay. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is take your paper, take a piece of paper.
Okay, yeah.
Take a pen. If you don't have a pen, I have one left. I'd like you to make eye contact with one person at the table that you're with. If you don't have a partner, get up and find one. Okay? Make eye contact. Now take your piece of paper and draw their portrait.
No. No.
Well, one person is giving us a demonstration of how our students will react when we ask them to do things. So I'd like you to make eye contact with someone at your table, and I'd like you to draw their sketch. Don't show them. Don't show them. Just do your best. Okay, go ahead and just put those final touches. Put your final touches on. And then go ahead and sign your portrait with your name on it. Then hand it to the person that you drew. Okay. Okay. So I just want to bring your attention to a few things. When I first gave this task, there was a thick tension in the room. Okay, there was some strong resistance. I heard someone over here say, "I'm really not good at this. I really am not good at drawing." I heard another person say, "I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best." Someone over here said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And someone over here said, "You are much prettier than this." Right? So I like to do this exercise because when we get to the end here, though, 95% of you have smiles on your faces. You're smiling. This professor here said, "I'm going to hang this on my office door." I'm going to hang this on my office door. And I want you to kind of have this open-mindedness as we walk through our day together, our hour together today, that some of the things that we're going to talk about are going to push you out of your comfort zone a little bit, okay? But if you just give it a shot, and as my history professor told me over here, when they first started working on innovating in their classrooms, you know, they tried a few things, it didn't work, they had to crumple up the paper and throw it away and start over, okay? And so what I'm trying to do here with this first exercise is just have some open mind, give an example of just some open-mindedness about pushing your limits, and that actually, if you do that, if you do try something new, if you do try something that you haven't done before, or that you don't feel like you're good at, and that's how I felt when I first started innovating my classroom. Okay? One reason I love coming and doing these things is because I love to lecture. Okay? I absolutely love it. So when I first started innovating in my classroom, I had the impression that I needed to not lecture and I wasn't going to get to do something that I'm really good at. Okay? So, but I've ended up being able to figure out a way of doing a flipped classroom that does allow me to shine and have fun and engage my students in ways like you were just engaged here. Okay, so let's just take that open-mindedness with us as we travel through this exercise together, Flipped Classrooms 101, an introduction to flipped learning. Now, there's going to be lots of folks in here who know more about flipped learning than I do because you are in the context here at UH and you've already done it. I hope what you'll do is feel inspired to try new things, but also help others in this community of folks who are interested in this topic. So the way that we're going to walk through this, the learning outcomes for this, our time here together, is that I'm going to go through 7 big ideas about flipped classrooms. And all of these materials will be available to you, so you can take notes if you want, but you don't have to. And there's a recording of this as well, so you don't have to remember everything that we talk about. But I'm going to introduce 7 big ideas about flipped classrooms that you can take with you. And we're going to do that in 4 parts. The first part we're going to dig down into a definition of what is a flipped classroom. Then we're going to talk about why you should flip your classroom. How do you flip your classroom? And then we'll close with a call to action. So let's start off with this question. What is a flipped classroom? And I'd like you to just take 15 to 20 seconds to write down what you think a flipped classroom is. So the easiest way to define a flipped classroom is to think about it in contrast to a traditional classroom. And there's a ton of misunderstanding around what a flipped classroom is. So I want to just start off by setting the record straight on what a flipped classroom is right off the bat. So in a traditional classroom or a non-flipped classroom, students usually get first exposure to the content. That means the first time they hear anything about the content in that class is during class time via direct instruction from a teacher. And direct instruction is like what I'm doing right now, okay? So for example, the first time they hear about the Pythagorean theorem would be when the instructor is standing up at the board defining the Pythagorean theorem for them. So that's a traditional classroom, okay? So one common question I get is, what is the difference between a flipped classroom and doing homework? So I think this is a really good question, and I'll just go ahead and read it to you. How is a flipped classroom different than homework, other than it's taped and students watch it and then can rewatch it? It prepares them for class, and so does a good assignment. Okay? And so what I'd like you to do now, and if you're not using the system, you don't need to worry about it. You can just jot down what your answer is. I'm going to put up a poll for you to answer. A flipped classroom is having students watch videos outside of class and do homework in class. And if you're not using the system, you can go ahead and just jot that down on your piece of paper. So the question is, when I say doing homework, do I just mean one student, or do I mean a group of students doing a task together? So most people think a flipped classroom is having students watch you do a lecture video outside of class, and then they come together and they do their homework together during class time, and you walk around and watch them. Okay? So most of you are saying that no, that's not a flipped classroom. Okay, that's correct. That's not a flipped classroom. So all of what a flipped classroom is, it's the exposure, that first exposure, instead of happening during class time, it happens before class. And homework is typically something that happens after class, okay? So in a flipped class, that first exposure happens before. They prepare to participate in class activities by doing some kind of out-of-class work. Now, here's the important part. That does not have to be a video. However, this myth that out-of-class work has to be you giving a lecture video, I don't know how that got spread. I do not use that in my own class. Okay? This does not have to be a lecture video. It can be a reading assignment. It can be videos from someone else. It can be an audio story from NPR. It can be photographs. The idea is that you're just giving them some pre-exposure to the content before they come to class time. Then the second part happens, okay? And that's what goes on during class. So the idea in a flipped class is that during class, students will practice applying concepts that are key to their learning with feedback from their peers and their instructor. Now, this could be just doing homework, okay? That is one way to flip your class. One way to flip your class is to spend hour upon hour creating a lecture video, putting it online, seeing that no one is watching it, and then going into class the next day and having them do homework during class. That's one way to flip your class. It's certainly not the best way, okay? So the idea here is just that there's some way for students to interact with the content and get feedback either from you or from their peers, okay? Now, how many people stopped there, basically in their definition? There's a before and there's a during in a flipped class. Did most people stop there? Yeah, okay. This is the biggest misconception about flipped classrooms, that there's only two parts. A true flipped classroom is a three-part framework, and it includes continuing the cycle of learning after class, okay? So the framework for a flipped classroom that I follow, and that is the standard in the flipped classroom learning community, is that there's a before phase, a during phase, and then an after phase. Like I said, that biggest misconception about flipped classrooms is that it involves only two parts. What happens then is that you focus all of your energy on that first part and that second part, and you forget about that third part. That third part is really important because that's when students have an opportunity to check their understanding and extend their learning. Now, I'm not suggesting that they'll do the pre-class work or the after-class work on their own, okay? I'm going to give you some techniques to help you figure out how to do that. But the big idea here is that a flipped classroom really has three parts to it: a before, a during, and an after, and most people completely forget about that after part. And guess what? If you forget about it and you don't direct students' attention during that after part, then they're going to forget about it, and they're not going to continue their learning, okay? So throughout each of these phases, you always want to direct students' attention to the most important things that you want them to retain and learn, okay? You always want to have their pre-class work, their during-class work, and their after-class work be focused on the key concepts, the key understandings, the key skills that you want them to take with them outside of class. So a big mistake in a flipped classroom is that oftentimes with this pre-class work, what we'll do is we'll ask students questions just to check to see if they did the work. We won't actually use those questions to direct their attention to the things that we want them to learn, okay? So I want you to volunteer to tell me how you would respond to this real faculty question that I got. I overthink while creating the videos, and I want it to be perfect. That becomes very time-consuming, which ends up holding me back from creating more videos. So can I have a volunteer to say how you might give advice to your colleague here?
Sorry, I just swallowed a bite. So I work with faculty in the College of Pharmacy, and like all faculty, they want everything to be perfect. But I explain to them that when they're lecturing, they're not perfect. They cough, they sneeze, they mistake, they have to come back. And students don't care if the video is not perfect.
Great.
Just like they don't care in class.
So students don't care that the video is perfect, but we all have this. I was just sharing with some colleagues. I got my review from my boss this year said that I was a perfectionist and that I needed to work on that. It's like, no, I don't. That's the best possible rating you could ever give me, right? So what about another opinion?
Well, maybe don't have a video, just have the content that you're trying to get them exposed to in a different form, like an article that clearly describes the methodology you're trying to train them in, for example, in vocational sense.
Yes, exactly. Don't do videos. If it's hurting your life and taking your time away, don't do them. Pick someone else's video. Use an article. Again, a flipped classroom does not equal doing videos outside of class. Okay? Now, like I said, the key point, let me go back one second. This person, what are they focused on? They're focusing on the videos. They're focusing on the technology. We know that it is not about the technology. It's about the pedagogy. Okay? It's about the pedagogy. And if you spend too much time trying to make these videos, the subject matter gets lost. Okay? So this is why I use this target. The most important strategy for a successful flipped classroom is during each of those phases, you want to direct students' attention to what you want them to learn. People only learn what they pay attention to. They only learn what they pay attention to. So when you're asking students questions and you're engaging them in activities before, during, and after class, make sure it's about stuff that you care about. Okay? We love to ask students questions. You know, I might ask you, what institution am I from? Who remembers? Who cares, right? Who cares? Did you look at the slide or listen to what Donna said? Okay, so I can catch if you did that, but that doesn't really matter. That's not what I want you to remember. Okay? How many parts are there to a flipped classroom? That's what I want you to remember. Okay? So just to come to close with this first myth, a flipped classroom is a 3-part approach that can be implemented in any way that you want. Okay, it can be implemented in any way that you want. Don't forget about the after-class part. These are some extra tips, expert tips. Continued practice is essential for deep learning. Why? Because that means they will be paying further attention. Okay? The amount of time that they pay attention to the content is directly correlated with how deeply they will learn it. And always use the out-of-class and in-class lessons to direct that attention. Okay? But what if you really want to make videos? Okay? What if you really, really want to do that? Well, I'm not going to show you how to do that today, but I'm going to give you 2 examples. First of all, I've made a quick start guide to creating lecture videos with screencasting. So you can check out that link there if you'd like to get my quick start guide for putting together videos. If anyone's ever listened to the Todd Ferriss podcasts, has anyone ever listened to those? So Todd Ferriss, he's very, very popular, and he does a lot of podcasts, and he says at the beginning of each podcast, I am not going to edit this. Okay, so you can do that. You can say, I'm not going to edit this. You can make jokes when you make a mistake. Students will love that. It'll help them connect with you. Okay? Also, you can pay someone to make fancy stuff for you. Okay? So one of my favorite things to do is to open my videos with a hook video. And I'm going to show you an example of a hook video right now. So I could just drop the mic and walk out now, right? Okay, so this is a hook video. I paid $15 for this. It can go in front of all the really crappy videos that I make for my students to see. They see this, they think I'm the bomb. They totally think I'm the bomb, okay? So it literally took me 15 minutes to set this up. I used a platform called Fiverr, Fiverr, and then the guy's studio is called Eighth Studio. Eighth Studio. He has about 300 of these, and they cost between $5 and $20. So this was a little extra because he made it yellow instead of blue. Okay. So you can do those. That's really simple things that you just. If I tried to make this, it would take me a really long time. Okay, and I just put that in front of my videos. They don't care when they see that. They're just stoked. Okay. Sure.
You know, what do you think of the Khan Academy videos as a template? I mean, you never see this guy.
Right.
I don't even know what he looks like. Right.
Right.
But it's a way of delivering content. What do you as the expert in this
Sure.
think about that?
So the question is, what do I think about the Khan Academy videos as the problem solving? Okay, so I'm going to say that I think that the Khan Academy has been really good for education because it set off a lot of innovation. Okay, it set off a lot of innovation. Personally, what I think about those things is that I worry when people do videos and a lot of us fall victim to this as well. When we stand at the board and we do problems for students, we don't make mistakes. Okay? That's not realistic. We want them to, of course, we want to show them how to do the problems effectively, but we also want to show them what real math looks like. Okay? And we don't want them, they have this impression that they have to do it perfectly. But that's not, I mean, when we go to solve problems where there are no answers, which is what most of us are doing on a daily basis, we make lots of mistakes, and they need to see that. It's very hard for a faculty member to make mistakes in front of their students. I know this. I know this. So my impression about the Khan videos is they're great. They're great for providing content knowledge, but I worry a little bit about the authenticity in terms of actual problem solving and what that looks like. So, and I don't think that there needs to be a talking head. I know in higher education, actually, kids like to see you. They like to see your face. They will, I'm sure people on this campus have had this experience. You have no clue who the hell they are, and they come up to you, and they're like, oh, Dr. Schell, oh my God, like they're my best friend, but I don't have any clue who they are. But they feel like they know me because they see my face on the video, right? And hopefully you can edit out my cuss words on that video. But, so that's my take on that. I hope that answered the question. Okay, so let's do another one. And again, you don't have to use the system if you're not, you can just jot down your answer here. Oh, yes, I will. Okay, so one professor here just asked me if aren't I going to show you the results of the poll? Yes, I'm happy to do that. I forgot. And the last time, so I'm going to go ahead and show results. So you can see here that most people are saying false, and I did push the results to your screen. You should have that. Most people are saying false, that you don't have to flip your entire class for flipped learning to work. This whole word, flipped class, it makes you think like you have to do the entire course. That's actually the wrong approach. I do not think you should flip your entire class when you're first starting, okay? You can flip, it's an approach. It's not an actual class, it's an approach that can be done gradually, or you can be like me and be really stupid and try to do it all at one time, okay? So I did that with my class. I flipped my classroom with project-based learning, and it was crazy. I really wish I would have only done it with one topic. I put way too much pressure on myself. The other thing is kind of like with this drawing, and these history professors here have tried flipping their classes, like we did with the drawing, you want to be able to crunch up your paper, throw it away, and start over really quickly if it doesn't work or you make tweaks. You want to do prototypes, and you can't do that if you try to do the entire thing at once. Okay? So expert tip for this is start small. You could flip one concept, one chapter, one unit, one lab, one course. You can even flip an entire school. Folks have done that. Okay? But I recommend starting with one concept or one chapter and really getting a handle and make a template for yourself. Okay? Okay. I think you guys will like this next question. I did make up that word. We have way more spread in this response than we've had in the previous responses. Okay. So let's start digging into this one a little bit. First of all, this is Christopher Columbus Langdell. And he was the dean of the Harvard Law School in the 1890s, and he developed the case study method. In the case study method, you have to read the cases before you come to class. Do we have any law folks? Any law folks business? We know business folk here. Business cases, okay. So biology cases. So what happens in a law school, if you remember, or you know any lawyers, you read the case before you come to class. What happens in class? You get cold called. You get cold called, okay? This is really the first modern flipped classroom, 1890s, developed by Christopher Columbus Langdell at Harvard, okay? So it's not really a new idea. Where are my humanities folks? Humanities folks? Okay, yeah. So whenever I talk to humanities folks about this, they just roll their eyes, right? Because flipped classroom, of course, we've been flipping our classroom. You can't talk about Hamlet if they don't do the work before they come to class. Can't read Hamlet during class time. Well, they don't do the work before they come to class, but that's beside the point. But yeah, so this is a pretty old idea. But actually, it's even older than that. Okay, so here's an image of the school at Athens. It's a little difficult to see with the light bulb here, but what are some of the things that you see going on here? Interaction, lots of interaction, reading, some individual work, right? Socializing. Here's Socrates and Plato here. Here's Pythagoras. He's really deep in thought. He's like, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Right? So we have individual work. We have people working together. We have arguments. But where are the two teachers? All of them are teachers. But these are our two sort of pedagogues, right? They're not involved in every little thing. Okay? They're sort of on the side. So I think this is a really good depiction of the first flipped classroom, the school at Athens. Okay, so this is a really old idea, having our classrooms look more like this. Sir?
Okay, the Socratic method was based on the teacher asking questions.
Yes.
But there was no preparation phase. If you look at the dialogues, you can see clearly that he was taking people out of the experience. You are making shoes. What do you know about that? And so forth. So the example is very contrived.
So the example is very contrived. He said there's no preparation for Socratic dialogue outside of the classroom. Okay? that there were no preparations for Socratic dialogue outside of the classroom, right? What I'm talking about, though, is what he does during class time, what a flipped classroom should look like, okay? What a flipped classroom should look like. What he does, what Socrates did during class time is exactly what we hope that people will be doing during class time, seeking engagement through questioning, okay? So this is what I think that a flipped classroom should look like, okay? But it really actually is kind of a edu-trend, right? It's kind of both, right? It's just a fancy name for something that's been done for a really long time. If the term flipped classroom doesn't really show up in the literature until 2010, 2011, and started off with 246 references in the scholarly literature, and now last year it was 11,900 references. Okay? So it's a new term for a very old idea. It's a new term for a very old idea. The first modern flipped classroom was really developed in the 1890s. Eric Mazur developed peer instruction in the 1990s, 100 years later, which is an even more modern flipped classroom approach. And in 2000, some economists had a seminal publication that they called the inverted classroom. Okay, that they called the inverted classroom. And Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sands really started to popularize the flipped classroom language in 2007. So this question, is it an edu-trend? It's yes and no. Okay, the term is, but the ideas and the ideas that are underlying how we want to see students engaging in class are very old, and I will argue are as old as antiquity. And the ideas of having students prepare before they come to class are at least as old as the 1890s with Christopher Columbus Langdell and the case study method. Okay, so let's do another one. So we had some fast results to that. So most people are saying no, it doesn't mean no more lecture. So this is a picture that I took on a recent visit to Harvard Law School. How does this contrast with the picture of the school at Athens? It looks like jail. Right, so where's the interaction here? His back is to the students, okay?
But everybody's facing the instructor, so it's kind of one way.
One way, right?
Well, I noticed the desks are bolted, it looks like.
Yep, so they are.
They can face any other direction.
They are bolted to the floor. Some students appear to be taking notes, right? They appear to be taking notes.
Everybody's in the same, actually the same position.
Every,
They're like locked into a position, even if they're doing different things.
right, everyone's locked into the same position. So again, how does this contrast with the school at Athens? What did we see in the school at Athens? Different people, different roles. Not everyone had their eyes zeroed in on the teachers, right? I'm sorry, there was a lot of discussion. Okay? So what's happening in a classroom like this is that there's lecture going on, and it's usually a 50-minute chunk. Okay, it's usually a 50-minute chunk of no pauses, of direct instruction. And this is this is going to be, I'll give you a trigger warning here. This is going to be a contrived example. This is an example of some folks out of MIT who put electrodermal sensors on students and followed them throughout their days. And when they followed the students throughout their days, so we've got some biologists in here, an electrodermal sensor, it's basically a wristband they put around their wrists, and it measures their temperature, it measures the amount of their perspiration, it can measure, some of them can measure heart rate, and it's not a measure of their brain activity, but it is a proxy for their central nervous system, okay? So here you can see that this student, he's going throughout his day. This is just one student, one sample, a sample of one. But you can see how active he is when he's studying. Okay, he's pretty active when he's studying. Why might that be? So he's probably at home, or he's probably with a group of peers, right? There's probably a lot of interaction going on because they tend to study in groups at MIT. What happens when he's watching TV? It's kind of flat lines, right? I mean, that kind of makes sense, though, okay? So this is a concept of our working memory. We're psychologists. Any psychologists in here? Sort of, okay. So our working memory, we have a limited capacity in our working memory, and when it starts to get overloaded, when too much information is coming at us, it kind of goes into a meditative state, all right? Because it's called cognitive overload. And we can only process a certain amount of information coming at us at one time, okay? So when we're watching TV, that's sort of what we do. We just sort of zone out. It kind of also happens when we're doing chores, okay? But in lab and when he's doing homework, he's super, super active.
It's interesting to see that like the lab and the homework are almost inversely correlated. I think that if he increases the lab, amplitude, then the homework will be lower. Maybe, I don't know.
Possibly, yeah. But his studying and his homework, he's pretty active, okay? So here he is sleeping. He is an undergraduate male, so we're not sure what he's doing when he's sleeping. But he is quite active, right? But he does, kind of get some rest, right? Well, let's look at what happens when he's in class, every day that he's in class. That's when he's really resting. So what does that look most like? I heard somebody say sleep. He's more awake when he's asleep than when he's in class. But yeah, it looks like TV. And it makes sense because when we're watching TV, it's just a steady stream of information. When we're in a lecture like you are right now, there's a steady stream of information. And I like to call this the brain on a traditional classroom. And this little guy is the boredom monster. Okay, he's what I call the boredom monster. I can feel him kind of in here right now a little bit. But that's kind of a 50-minute chunk of lecture. So in a flipped class, it doesn't mean you can't lecture. It just means to use methods to chunk up that lecture. And I like to use this method called the pause method. And the pause method helps reduce a student's cognitive load. It's as simple as, okay, take a few seconds to think about what we just talked about and write down any questions that you have. Okay, 30 seconds is enough. Okay, just to give them a little pause.
Do they really write anything down?
So it depends on the question, right? It depends on the question you ask them. Some people don't. If I tell you to do that, some people won't in this room. Some people will. The idea is not necessarily to force them to write something down as much as it is to give them a pause. You can ask a clicker question. Yep. So the idea is not to not lecture. It's just to do it in little chunks and do something interesting between those chunks, like a clicker question. Have them turn to their neighbor and discuss. Okay. My last my last point on this particular, these are just made up numbers. I don't think anyone wants to listen to me for more than 10 minutes at a time, which is why I'm trying to give you a question at least every 7 to 10 minutes, or give you some kind of different activity every 7 to 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be evenly spaced, but I think 7 minutes is about the amount of time that that students can listen with their cognitive load limits.
The numbers that you keep quoting here, I mean, you sound very much like the amount of time between the start of a TV program to the first commercial. It sounds like the stuff that it really is these really, really short bursts that we've kind of been training for the last, I want to say 20 or 30 years. So is that what we've done, is we've trained our brains in such a way that that's how we're just going to behave?
So the question is, it sounds like that I'm suggesting breaking up the chunks aligned with how TV commercials are chunked, right? Does anyone think that marketing firms and the TV industry make stuff up, or do they do it based on substantial amount of research? They do it on a substantial amount of market research, okay? And so I'm using 7 to 10 minutes, but the truth is that they do purposefully pause TV shows to give people, well, they do it for advertising, but I don't think it's because that's what our brains are used to. I think it's because that's actually the amount of time that a reasonable person can pay attention to something. Okay? When you are making a lecture video, if you do make lecture videos, I would also chunk them. Okay? I would also chunk them. And finally, lecture is a comfort blanket for students. Okay? And if they have learned their entire lives, they have learned that that is how they learn. And they have succeeded in lecture-based environments. And we succeeded in lecture-based environments. So if you just rip that blanket away from them, it will cause resistance. Okay? So I think it's always important to lecture a little bit. Lecture a little bit. And I'll let you in a little secret that I don't put on the slides, but that is, on this slide, is that lecture is a comfort blanket for us. Okay? It's also a comfort blanket for us. So I'm here to tell you to lecture, just try to do it in little chunks. Okay? Lost the projector shut out, but that's okay. The big idea there is that lecture a little or in little chunks. Students really may resist a flipped classroom. My best piece of advice in terms of student resistance is do not call it a flipped classroom. Okay? I would not call it, I do not call mine a flipped classroom. Okay? It is an innovative way of teaching. Do not call it an experiment. Nobody wants to pay you $1,300 a class to experiment on them. Or you don't get that money. But nobody wants to pay for that. Okay, so don't call it a flipped classroom. Don't call it an experiment. Just call it the way you teach. Okay? That's my best piece of advice to you. And make sure that what you ask them to do outside of class, that you actually use it, that you actually use that on their assessments. Okay? Otherwise, they won't do the out-of-class work. But if they know that they'll be tested on it, and you demonstrate that, they will do the out-of-class work. So I'm going to, as they're fixing the projector here, I'm just going to move on into the next section, and I'll push a question up on your screen. Flipped classrooms are fads, not tied to how people actually learn. So most people are saying that this is false, but let's dig into a little bit about why this is a myth. So everybody is going to need, we're going to do a little 3-part mini lesson on how people learn, and everybody is going to need a piece of paper for this. I'm going to give you a task, and I want you to study the letters that are going to be on the screen. And I don't want you to write them down, but I want you to be ready to write them down. Okay, so I'm going to put the letters on the screen for about 8 seconds, and then I want you to write down as many as you can remember. Okay, so I see some people with their pens ready. How many did you remember? 13? Anybody got 13? No? Yeah, we got a savant back here. All right, we got some savants at U of H. Okay, we're going to try it one more time. The different set, different exercise, okay? Everybody ready? Clear your head. Who knows that these are the same exact letters? Okay? Which is easier? This one. Why? Association. We have prior understanding of what these letters mean. Okay? Some people say that it's because they're chunked, but the other letters were chunked as well. It's not the pieces, it's that the meaning of the pieces that's important. This is a microscopic image of Velcro. And Velcro, as you can see, it's made up of thousands and thousands of loops and hundreds of hooks. And the Velcro theory of memory and learning tells us that it's much easier to learn new information. So if we consider the hooks new information and the loops prior knowledge, it's much easier for us to learn things when there's prior knowledge to hook into. Okay? Learning is that's what learning is. Learning is the interaction of new information with prior knowledge. And if we don't have anything for that new information to hook into, we have to create a loop. And that's much harder. That's why it's much easier for you to remember and to do something with those chunks of letters, JFK, FBI, CIA, than it is for you to do something with that first set of letters, which you would have to spend a lot more time learning and remembering. The biggest predictor of learning success, the strongest predictor, the strongest correlate is prior learning. We learn best when we can connect our prior knowledge with new knowledge, or we can connect new knowledge with prior knowledge. And that's what we're trying to do in a flipped classroom, is we're simply trying to give students, build some of these prior loops up so that when we come to class, it's easier for them to make those connections. Okay? So we're trying to expose students before they come to class to some content knowledge to make it easier for them to do the harder work during class time. So part 2 of this little mini lesson on how people learn is the importance of application. So now I want you just to think of something that you are really expert in and something that you know really, really well, something you're really good at. It could be related to your discipline. It could be baking a cake. So somebody give me a couple things. Shout out a couple things. What are you really good at? Lecture. Excel. Okay. Baking?
Project management.
Project management. God, I need your help. What else? Kinematics. Soccer. Softball. Okay. Languages. Okay. So now I want you to think about how you learn that so well.
I think it totally depends from the discipline.
It totally depends on the discipline. I would completely agree with you. 100%. I'm sorry?
By teaching it.
Right, by teaching it, right? And I would argue that that is a practice or an application of the concept. So most people probably picked practice. And that is not to say that a good lecture is not important. Okay? If you want to see an amazing lecture, go on to the TED Talk and watch, oh gosh, what's his name? He's a classical musician, and he talks about how to get people to enjoy classical music. I can't remember the name of the TED Talk, but it's something about the secret magic of classical music or something like that, or all TED Talks are titled like that. But possibly, yeah. But it's an amazing. I watched that 20-minute lecture, and I was like, oh, great. Lecture is amazing, and you really can learn from it, right? That's an amazing lecture. I'm not saying that a good lecture doesn't teach people. I really think that a good lecture can, in some ways, change people's lives when you hear an amazing lecture. But it's not how we learn something really, really deeply, okay? We have to apply what we learn. We have to practice what we learn. You can't learn the piano. You can't learn to do mathematics. You can't learn to do to manage studies doing the electron transport chain by watching a video of somebody doing it. You actually have to do it yourself. So I do think that a good lecture sets the stage. A good lecture can set the stage, but to really learn something well, you have to practice that. Okay? We learn when we apply knowledge, and we learn the best when we get feedback on that. Okay? So my most intense learning experience was when I got my doctorate. Okay? That's where I had the deepest learning experience, where I had the deepest, most intense learning experience. And that's because it was with constant application of my ideas and constant feedback from my advisor. Okay? With reams and reams and reams of paper with red marks all over it. Okay? So I do think that we learn best when we apply what we learn, and we do that with feedback from more knowledgeable others. Okay? Did you have a question?
It's a point. I think really, I will give an example. I know very well how to compute a standard deviation.
Great.
When I was in school and they asked me to do an exercise computing a standard deviation and say this exercise is stupid, I didn't do it. You know the formula, you know how to apply it, you do need to apply it. Then on the other hand, writing is an example where you need to write, and the more you write, the better you become at it. So this is true for some fields, but not for all.
Absolutely. So what this esteemed professor is sharing with us is that this is not black and white. Okay? There are gray areas here. Okay? But when to really, truly be good at something, you can't just watch someone do it. Okay? You can't just watch someone do it. The importance of feedback, I started to mention. The importance of feedback. When people become elite athletes or they become elite scientists, they're typically getting a lot of feedback from others. Okay? They're getting a lot of coaching. This is an article that was in Science magazine that looked at feedback, students who were studying and then doing tests and seeing how their performance, sorry, just a second. The learning condition was that they studied and then they took a final test. Okay? So in this condition, they just studied some material and then they took a final test and their score there was .11. Here, they took a test instead of studying, and then they took a second test. Here, they took a test where they got immediate feedback on right or wrong. And in the fourth condition, they took a test, they got delayed feedback, and then they took another test. Okay, so they took that final test. So you can see here that when students get feedback, whether it's immediate or delayed, they perform better on that final test. Okay? So feedback is something that is important to give students.
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
A little bit tangential, and that is dealing with the number of hours of practice. I mean, it gets back to this whole idea of the Outliers book, you know, where it goes back to your point about the leading experts, leading scientists, and invariably they put a set number of focused hours on something. In this context, you know, how many hours do they have to have actually practicing it, you know, to be able to get to a certain level of competence that we want to achieve in class?
So the question is, how many hours does a student have to have in order to develop competency? I would say that totally depends on the actual discipline. But I would say is that actually what's really important is that they don't cram the hours. Okay, so what they do is that they take 5 hours. I hate this. This is the worst thing that happens to me, is that a student comes in and says to me, Professor Schell, I don't know how I got this score on this exam. I studied so hard. I studied last night. I studied all night. I studied for 12 hours, right? Okay? So the problem is that it's not the amount of time that a lot of these kids are studying. Of course, there are kids who don't care, but what I'm focused on are the kids that really try, okay? What this student needs to do is to study for 3 hours on Monday, 3 hours on Tuesday, 3 hours on Wednesday, take a break maybe, and then Thursday night or Friday morning study another 3 hours, okay? So the idea is to spread the studying over time instead of cramming it, okay? So it really depends, just to come back to your question, it depends on what the topic is, how much time they need to develop the expertise. But if we can get them to spread the amount of time, use the same amount of time but spread it over a longer distance, it's called spaced practice. This is the cognitive science term for it. To space their practice instead of cram their practice, they will do better.
So I mean, tying this back to what you're saying, is forcing them to spread out the practice by putting the practice in the classroom, is that enough? Or is it really, that's kind of a spurious thing because you've only got an hour and a half, or whatever in the classroom?
Well, that's what the beauty of the flipped classroom. If you can get them to do work before, during, and after, then you've got a natural space. So I'm just going to quickly, I'm getting close to my time here. So I just want to say that flipped classrooms really bring these key learning strategies together. The power of prior knowledge, the importance of application during class, and opportunities to provide feedback. Okay? So they really are tied to a strong body of research on how people learn. And to codify that a little bit, this is Bloom's taxonomy. And in Bloom's taxonomy, he created this taxonomy of thinking skills, with the lower level thinking skills not unimportant, but that take less cognitive energy, are remembering and understanding, with the highest order being creating and evaluating and analyzing. In a traditional class, the design is that we want them to listen and remember and understand. And then we send them out of class on their own to do the harder parts. So in a flipped class, all we're doing is asking to switch that out. So have them, when they're alone by themselves, doing the easier parts, the remembering and the understanding, and doing the harder parts during class time when they are with experts and with others that can give them feedback. Okay? So just to close that up, flipped classrooms do leverage how people learn best. We learn best when we have prior content knowledge, when we can apply that content knowledge, and we have feedback. So I don't want to, I'm out of time, but I want you to know that there is a way to get students to do pre-class work. So this is the biggest issue that folks have. How do you get students to do pre-class work? The method that I use, or my philosophy is, if you assess it, they will come. Okay? And the method that I use is called just-in-time teaching. And I'm going to briefly walk you through a very simple protocol for that. You give them an assignment, a video, a reading, a picture, an audio file. That's the reading assignment. You ask them 2 conceptual questions that would be very hard to answer if they didn't do the reading. This is not what institution did Julie go to. This is critique the 3 phases of the flipped classroom. Okay? These are conceptual questions that require thinking. And then I ask them a feedback question. What did you find most difficult or confusing about this topic? I review their feedback. I spend a little time addressing their difficulties during class. I use this rubric, and I'm going to give you a quick start guide for this in just a second. I use this rubric to score them. I do not score this on correctness. If they don't answer, they get a 0. If they provide an answer but they don't give any rationale, they get a 1. If they provide a response and a good reasoning and good rationale, then I give them full credit. This is a full 33% of their grade in my class. Okay? A full 33% of their grade. Other people do 10%. All of my students do their out-of-class work. This is an implementation guide for that that you can look through. So, sorry, I know some of you didn't get it. Remember that the slides we'll send out the slides. So if you assess it, they will come. Use just-in-time teaching. You can give frequent quizzes in class. There's an article on my blog called Flipping Your Class with Quizzes. No better way to get students to do their work outside of class than to give them a quiz the first 15 minutes of class. I also post students' comments in class like I did today with the questions on the little note cards that I had. Students like to see that you're paying attention, so they like when you put their questions up. I don't put their names, but I do put their questions up. And, most importantly, don't forget to follow up with those after-class activities. I'm going to skip this one. You should all know the answer to this now, right? There are millions of ways to flip your class. And in closing, I'm just going to show you some images of how I flip my class. So for the before, I use that just-in-time teaching method. Here's an example of a pre-class just-in-time teaching assignment that I gave my students. Read and complete the entire Why Don't Students Like School book. Watch Canvas videos you need to do to complete your assignment. And then I ask this question, compare and contrast the terms abstraction and concreteness. And here's the student's answer. Concrete knowledge is necessary for abstraction and critical thinking, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Then in class, we did peer instruction. I asked them to tell me if the below problem requires abstraction or concrete thinking. So this is an example of applying what they learned about abstraction and concreteness. So in class, I asked them to tell me, does this require concrete thinking or abstraction? Okay? And then I lead them through peer instruction. I give them the question, I tell them to think on their own, I ask them to write down their answer, and then I ask them to find someone with a different answer and discuss. Then I ask them to say whether they changed their answer or not. And then I come to closure with an explanation. So this is one of the things I do during class time, okay, to help them apply. This is called peer instruction. I write a lot about this. If you want more information, I even have a video, what is peer instruction in 2 minutes, that breaks all of this down.
So this is a question I ask everybody who's ever flipped a classroom. How big are your classes?
So I have done from 12 to 100, and I know folks who do it with 500. So that's where you have to automate. You have to use the learning management system, the powers of the learning management system. This is an example of what my class and in-class peer instruction looks like with my students. So these are my two students talking about that abstraction question, and this is me listening to them try to explain, but the shortest distance. And then take-home quiz after class that I give to them, define concreteness. And their answer was facts or knowledge specific to a situation, and then I've got the definition, which gives them the feedback. So this is just an example of how I flip my class. There are tons of ways to do this. There is no one right way. But just don't forget that after-class part. That's the important piece. My call to action to you is to pick one thing that you heard today and see if you can implement it. And remember the 7 tips. And hopefully with that, you can try something new. You don't put so much energy in it that you can't just scrunch up that piece of paper and try again. So thank you very much for your attention. I know we're over time, but I'm happy to hang out for questions. Thank you. Yes. So